in the way owners treated their slaves, or their whole belief about their slaves. And part of that way of looking at the slaves had to do with dehumanization, different than other forms of slavery. Most people who became slaves in other societies became slaves as a result of war. Two societies went to war, the winners enslaved the losers. Sometimes in a case like Rome, where you had a more dominant society, would make war on a weaker state and steal the manpower. Europeans, however, systematically turned the shipping, capturing, selling of other human beings into a business that would develop into the backbone of an entire economy, providing the foundation for the world's wealthiest nation. That is different. And we need to be very, very clear about that it's about power and money. It was then and it is now. Never changed. And we have to understand that in the context. And when you read this statement, this was basically the Three-Fifths Compromise. And the Three-Fifths Compromise wasn't too different from what happened in Florida. Because here's what happened. In the Constitutional Convention, they were trying to figure out, this was opportunity to abolish slavery. Of course, you know, the Southerners wanted to keep it because they were slave owners, Northerners. It wasn't really about trying to, can we all get along? It had to do about money and power. They saw this opportunity to abolish slavery. One state was the only state that decided it wasn't going to go along with abolishing slavery. It would not be part of the Union if they abolished slavery, which curtailed the whole discussion and tabled it, making slavery legal under the Constitution. Does anybody know which state that was? Carolina, South Carolina, yeah. They were the ones that couldn't. And so they basically were stalemated. So now the issue was, how are we going to count slaves into the population count? Now consider this. Delegates considered the more people represented in a state, the more delegates they can send to the House of Representatives, the more power they can wield, right? Well, of course, Southerners wanted to add the slaves. Northerners saying you can't add them, you don't even include them as human. How do you do that? So the Three-Fifths Compromise is, rather than each slave being counted as a person, 3/5 of a state's total slave population were counted in that total population, and this way African people of African descent, enslaved Africans, became 3/5 of a human. Just that quickly, you see. But you can barely see in these writings that this is a human being you're talking about. This becomes very important as we move forward. Richard Oswald, another one of those people, I call him an absentee slave owner. This is the son of a Presbyterian minister, international trade of enslaved Africans, majority shareholder in Banks Island, dominant figure in Grand Oswald and Company, you should look that up, amassed a fortune that would be worth $68 million today. That's how well he did. He never left home, so he could stay dressed up like that. Then we have this fellow. You all know him, right? Best known for? Yes. I wanted to know how he was before he founded that Amazing Grace. Because it took him a long time to find that Amazing Grace, let me just tell you. And let me give you an idea, an understanding. Most of you are familiar with our work, know that part of my question as a social scientist is, how did a people who deem themselves superior, moral, intelligent, and civilized engage in barbaric behavior for centuries? How does one reconcile that opposing perspective? And here's what I do know, and I know my fellow mental health people in the audience know, that human beings in general cannot function with too much internalized conflict. Hence, something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is what it sounds like. Cognitive thinking discord. When people are faced with stuff that conflicts internally, they get all twisted. So we have to reconcile any conflict that's going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, internally. Anything inconsistent with my beliefs and my behavior. Now, Dr. Edwin Nichols, most of you, if you haven't heard of Dr. Edwin Nichols, you need to bring him in. Dr. Nichols studied for many, many years. He is now in D.C. He pioneered work in something called the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. He talked about, and he's a retired industrial psychologist, wrote his dissertation in German. I can tell you a little bit about Dr. Nichols. And as an African-American man, brilliant. He talked about and taught me about this whole notion of cognitive dissonance and how one reconciles it, especially as it relates to oppressing other people. Because generally speaking, human beings struggle when you oppress people. You know, it's just a normal thing. It's just, you don't feel good about it, right? So how does one reconcile oppressing or subjugating an entire group of people? How does one reconcile that? And Dr. Nichols says, here's a formula, you can write it down, true of any group you oppress, whether it's women or people of color, you name the group. In order to remove the dissonance associated with that behavior, you have to first justify the behavior, which eases the mind, you see, and the conscience. But how you do it is what's so interesting. You must relabel the people to fit your behavior towards them. So then we can all go to sleep at night. So let's look at what our boy did here. This is what he said. He says, slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are not destined for the next world. Look at, you see what we've done. He was experiencing dissonance. He reconciled that dissonance by saying, well, they don't have Christian souls anyway, which means that I am absolved. You see? Then he goes on to say, when the women and girls are taken on board ship, naked, trembling, terrified, they're often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey, interesting use of words, is divided upon the spot. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. I sinned with a high hand. And then he found, okay, let's keep it clear. Then there's him, old Carl. We all know Carl, actually. We all took high school biology. You had to study Carl. Now, Carl becomes an important person because remember that one of the things that we begin to do in order to justify our behavior, you start trying to find those who validate your perspective, right? And one of the things that we do know, something that trumps everything else, is when people tell you, well, you know, what I'm saying to you is true because it's a scientific fact. You see, once science gets in there, then science trumps everything, right? Now, it's interesting about science. You know, we lost a planet recently. How do you lose a planet? That's called science was wrong. Okay, but they never admitted that. You notice they never said we were wrong. And I had become fond of the planet, actually. I had a little dissonance when they took the planet away because they can't own their stuff. They just have simple paradigm shifts. And that's what happens. So science, which is supposed to trump everything, is what they went to legitimize their behavior towards people of African descent. This individual, Carl von Linnaeus, note the date, 1707 to 1778, developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. This is a man who actually is the father of anthropology, which is scary. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists referred to his taxonomy of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his four families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo americanus. Now, who might that be? That would be Native Americans. And let's see what he said. He said that they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. No science yet. Homo europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo asiaticus, that would be Asians, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinion. And Homo afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. And there is only one group that received scathing attributions. And what group is that? So don't they deserve it? Didn't I tell you? Look at who they are. It's scientifically proven. They deserve to be enslaved. Remember, in order to remove the dissonance, you must justify your behavior. How do you do so? By relabeling the people to fit your behavior towards them. Do they not deserve it? Of course we enslave them, but we've told you what they are scientifically. And then my students, because I teach graduate students, social workers, most of whom are white, they go, well, we're talking 1707 to 1778, doctor. Do you not hear these same attributions, 2008? Hence, you nappy-headed. You see what I'm saying? Look at him. Why even talk about it? I mean, this is a man who basically was contemporary of Linnaeus, who founded his system a little differently than Linnaeus. He considered hair, skull, facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man that he identified in his work on the natural variety of mankind. And he said, and this is interesting use of words, some of the things are hidden in plain sight. How many people have heard the term mulatto? Okay. Now, mulatto is supposed to be a mixture of whom? Black and white people. Mulatto. You know, but there's a reason every single time there's little words like that show up. Mulatto comes from a Latin word mulus, M-U-L-U-S, which is the root of the word mule. A mule is the sterile offspring of a jackass and a horse. So a person that says I am mulatto, and some say it with great pride, are basically saying I'm mule-like. That's what that means. He's a man who's responsible for the word Caucasian. He took the name Caucasian from Mount Caucasus, listen to the science, because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark was believed to have rested after the flood, seemed, these are quotes from him, to be appropriate source for original race of man. Here's his logic. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which is a mean and primeval type, the others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides to 2 ultimate extremes. That is, on the one side the Mongolian, on the other the Ethiopian. Besides, it is white in color, which we may fairly assume to have been the primitive color of mankind. Anybody ever met a skull that wasn't white? So he just said, white skull, white people. Yeah, it's in a book, friends, and look at it. Should have known. Well, we do know now because, of course, we have CSI. I can tell you what folks are now. Race is a concept of society that insists there's a genetic significance behind variations, human variations in skin color, transcend outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classifications. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. That's the truth. That's what we are. We're more alike than different. But you know, Mr. Watson, bless his heart, Mr. Watson, in 2007, listen carefully because this is important to understand why it happened when it did. Mr. Watson won the Nobel Peace Prize for developing or discovering the double helix, the DNA strand. He was rewarded the Nobel Peace Prize for that. He's 2 minutes and 2 seconds from the grave. He almost made it. He really did. He was close. He was just if he'd just shut up, he could have died and went out with the, but no. 2007, he showed up on a tour, wrote a book, and he said black people are genetically inferior. Said that. 2007. I was touring in the UK during that time. Now let me explain why I was there. I was there because the United Kingdom, Tony Blair, well, he was supposed to apologize. He really didn't. He offered what he calls a statement of regret for slavery and for the slave trade. 2007 marked the bicentenary, the 200-year anniversary of the end of the slave trade in Europe. So the entire country celebrated, acknowledged that. Mr. Watson started experiencing cognitive because we were saying his people were bad. He didn't like the fact that his country was apologizing, so he needed to remove his dissonance by what? Justifying. So he came out and he says, no, you don't have to apologize. They deserve it, you see, because they are genetically inferior. At which point, they started taking the books off the shelf, canceled the tour, fired him. And he came back and he go, oh, I'm sorry, there is no scientific merit to my making that statement. He just couldn't help himself, you see, because it was creating dissonance for him. And he needed white people all over to know we didn't do a bad thing. For centuries, they deserved it. Are you following me? This is 2007. And then it was interesting, I talked to African Americans, people of African descent all over the world, really. And I said, does anybody know where the bicentenary of the end of the slave trade in America? And there's like, can I call home? Can I? 2008. Isn't it interesting that you heard nothing about it? This is marking the bicentenary of the end of the slave trade in America. But there's nothing said. And shame on us for not. You see, because in order to draw attention to it, then you'd have to acknowledge that it actually happened. And we're not getting ready to do that, because we're not going to tell the truth, you see. And then there was this kind of the look. I told people there was an apology, and black people said, really? Who? Where? What is an apology? House of Representatives issued an apology. Not only did they apologize, the book ought to really be selling well, because they said, yeah, we did it. We're sorry we did it. For all them centuries we did it. We're even sorry for what we did after that. Matter of fact, we're sorry we didn't toe you up today. This is way